In today's video, I'm going to go over a specific lower body hypertrophy day that I performed recently. Hypertrophy is also known as just muscle growth. So this is a muscle growth training lifting session. And essentially what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking about why I perform certain exercises, why I do this specific exercise order, my sets and reps, certain techniques. I'll even go into things like substitutes for certain exercises in case your gym doesn't offer these certain exercises that I'm performing. So I think that this video is going to give a lot of value to the beginner lifter in why certain people do certain things and what the benefit is out of certain aspects of training. Because especially when I first started, I had no idea what I was doing. And the gym can be really daunting when you're not sure why you should be doing a certain thing or why other people do a certain thing. And having some knowledge behind your training just empowers you so much more when you step foot into the gym rather than not knowing anything at all. So I hope that you guys derive some information out of this video. Now, in this particular lifting session, I'm starting with the seated hamstring curl. Now, I think that this is a great exercise to begin your lower body hypertrophy sessions with because it is not going to tax your cardiovascular or muscular system to that large of a degree. And when you place it before things like squats and deadlifts and hip thrusts and things like that, it is just a good supplement to not interfere with those lifts while still providing a maximal stimulus to your hamstrings. So that is why I like to perform this first. And a technique that is becoming more popular recently, but I think is a great thing to add into this exercise is just leaning forward. By leaning forward, you are creating a tremendous stress on your hamstrings, which has been seen time and time again to have growth promoting effects overall to your muscles. So anytime that you can provide a stretch under load, that is going to be a lot of bang for your buck. And if you think about it, think about touching your toes. When you're touching your toes, that is a common hamstring stretch. You are essentially doing the same thing by leaning forward on a seated hamstring curl. Now, for this particular exercise, I performed 3 sets, and this is going to be a common theme. In fact, in this workout, I performed 3 sets across the board. There is a reason to that, and essentially the reasoning is because I'm trying to hit 6 sets per body part on this lower body day. And the reason I'm hitting 6 sets is because for my total workout sessions in a week, I'm hitting each body part with a frequency of 3 times. Now, 6 times 3 is 18, and that's really pushing the volume, but this is going to provide a great stimulus for growth. And if you don't have access to a seated hamstring curl of this sort, or maybe it's taken and you don't want to wait, then a prone hamstring curl or a lying hamstring curl is going to be a great alternative. Now, I don't think that it's quite as substantial as the seated hamstring curl, but having some variety in your training is never a bad thing. So I encourage you guys to do a prone hamstring curl if you don't have a seated one. You could also play around with a Nordic curl, which is basically the body weight equivalent to these 2 movements. That is going to be very difficult though. So if you are a beginner in the gym, I wouldn't typically advise that, at least not completely. You could do other things like include a band for your Nordic hamstring curls or doing them just the eccentric or lowering phase aspect, whatever you need to do. It's up to you. Up next, we're running into my main squatting movement of the day, the belt squat. Now, I know that a squatting movement pattern is essential when it comes to lower body development. It is one of the main movement patterns that you should be doing for your lower body. And a squat typically works the anterior or front portion of the legs. It does not include the hamstrings that much. And therefore, it is a great exercise to perform after a direct hamstring exercise because your hamstrings aren't going to be a limiting factor since they're already fatigued in your squatting movement. And today I'm performing the belt squat. And why I like the belt squat is because it removes axial loading of the spine. In a traditional back squat or machine squat or Smith machine squat, whatever, you're loading from your shoulders, creating compression down your spine. Now, this isn't essentially a bad thing, but sometimes giving your axial skeleton a little bit of a break can be great. And especially if you are experiencing back pain or something like that, then a belt squat is perfect for you. Now, another reason why I like the belt squat is because it's providing resistance from the midline or the middle of your body, pulling you down. And this can just feel great. It enforces stability and coordination and control, and is a great movement if you're new to squatting, since it doesn't require as much coordination or balance. And therefore, it can be very beginner friendly and can really enforce overload of the musculature, especially the quads, since you are in a more upright position. And since we just hit our hamstring curls to the maximum degree, including this overloading stimulus to the quads and a little bit on the glutes is a great complement. Now, if your gym does not have this exercise, which I know that many gyms don't, then another form of a squat can be great. Now, a goblet squat is a squat where you're holding a dumbbell right here, and that can be similar to a belt squat or a front squat, except I'm not a huge fan of that exercise because the overload potential is not great, and your wrists and arms are going to be a limiting factor. Same with a front squat, that can also be very awkward. So I would prefer to substitute this with either a hack squat or a pendulum squat or a barbell back squat or a Smith machine back squat. That's what I would go for in this case. Next, we're going from the anterior portion of the body to the posterior chain. We're going back to the hamstrings, the glutes, the low back, a little bit of the calves with a belt squat RDL variation. Now, I chose this specific variation for nothing simpler than I was already at the belt squat. I love the belt squat RDL. It's convenient. I don't have to change my weights much. It just saves time. And sometimes that's all you really need at the end of the day to have a good workout. Just make it convenient, make sure you're getting that stimulus, and get out of there. Now, I particularly love this exercise, first of all, because it feels very smooth. In other variations of an RDL or a deadlift, you're having to deal with the barbell or a Smith machine or dumbbells or whatever. You're having to bring it over your knees. So your knees can really get in the way. Other things can get in the way. But with the cable pulling constantly from one center point, it's easy to just lock in your form. So it feels really good. It's providing constant tension, and it's a great exercise for overload. I also find that your range of motion can be a bit further, almost like a deficit RDL, since there's no plates to really get in the way. Now, the main technique recommendations that I have for this particular lift is to try not to round your back. Try and use the Valsalva maneuver, or, doing a deep inhale, filling your core all the way around as to not cause a lower back injury. And then just take it slow. You don't want to be rushing this movement too much. Really sink into that hip hinge. You want to be pushing your hips backwards while keeping a slight knee bend. You don't want to be bending your knees too much, or it'll be more of a conventional deadlift, which is not as hypertrophic since there is not as much constant stimulus on the given muscle groups. So that's what I would say for recommendations. Another thing is this can totally be substituted with a barbell RDL, a Smith machine RDL, dumbbell RDL, even a machine RDL if your gym has one available. These are all just similar ways of performing the same movement. So if your gym doesn't have a belt squat, just like I said with the belt squat, then you can use alternatives if needed. After this, I'm getting into another isolation exercise, the leg extension. Now this one is going to be isolating the quadriceps, and I like to perform this after squats, but not directly after squats. So I like to have a movement in between, aka the RDL that we just performed, because this is more of a finisher exercise. The leg extension is really great because it does not fatigue your central nervous system as much as other compound lifts. So it is a great way to introduce further stimulus, get some more activation, get some more hypertrophy in the legs without interfering with your recovery, which recovery is essential for muscle growth. So it's a great kind of like icing on the cake exercise after you've done your main heavy compound lifts. And pretty much every single gym that I've ever seen has a leg extension incorporated. Now, for some off chance you don't have access to a leg extension machine, then you could perform something like a sissy squat or other modifiable exercise instead of the leg extension. But you probably do have it. And in which case, I would just say, try not to rush this exercise. You can cause some knee pain if you're not careful. Don't go too heavy. This is something where you want to be performing at least 10 repetitions per set. This isn't something where you're going to be doing sub 5 repetitions. It's not an exercise where you're trying to get maximally strong on. This is really just one for the hypertrophic stimulus that it can provide. So do it nice and slow, really feel your muscles working, and do it for higher repetitions if you can. Now, after the leg extensions, I move on to the hip thrust machine. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, hey, you just said that you like to do your leg extensions after the compound lifts. What gives? This is a compound lift. And yes, it is a compound lift. But the bottom line is that I didn't want to go from a posterior chain exercise to another posterior chain exercise. I wanted something in between so that I could use the maximum amount of intensity on each of these exercises. It's a good idea to separate exercises according to the muscle groups that they are hitting. You're not going to do a squat, then a leg press. That's just going to fatigue your quads more than you need to. What you want to be doing is separating them, kind of going back and forth, so that on each given set, you can give it your all and get the most out of your training. And that's why I put RDLs, then leg extensions, then back to the posterior chain with the hip thrusts. And the reason why I am including this type of exercise, this mostly glute focused exercise, is because if you think about it, we hit the glutes halfway decently with the belt squat. I would say that on a squat, the primary mover is the quads. So I am counting the glute stimulus as half that in sets. So we did 3 sets of the belt squat. So it's 1.5 in terms of glutes. That's the same thing for the RDLs. 1.5 for glutes. That's a total of 3. So we're at 3 sets of glutes, whereas with the other body parts, if you've been counting, we have 3 for the quads from leg extensions, 3 from the quads with the squats, 3 for the hamstrings from the seated hamstring curl, and 3 for the hamstrings from the RDL. So we're at a total of 6 for our quads, 6 for our hamstrings, only 3 for our glutes, and therefore I am adding this direct glute builder, aka the hip thrust, for an additional 3 equaling 6. And that's kind of how I approach given sets. Anything that's a secondary mover in an exercise is going to be half for the stimulus, but we still want to be hitting that total of 18 sets per week per body part to get the most growth that we can. Common technique recommendation for the hip thrust is, again with the leg extension, just take your reps kind of slow. It's easy to get lost in translation with the repetitions with the hip thrust. It's easy to rush your sets. So try squeezing at the top, really feeling it, and I promise you're going to have much greater DOMs the next day, which may not be the number one indicator of growth, but it definitely means that you did something. So I recommend taking those repetitions slow, feeling them. And then in terms of other exercises, if you don't have a machine hip thrust, Smith machine hip thrust is a great alternative. So is a barbell hip thrust. Some people even use the prone hamstring curl or the seated hamstring curl as a way to perform machine hip thrusts if you don't have any other options. So there are plenty of other ways that you can provide a stimulus for glute growth. You could even do glute bridges off of the floor if you need to. Okay, next up, we're getting into some of the smaller muscle groups, namely the calves. Guys, don't skip your calf training. They're very important to build, just as important as any of the other muscle groups. And for this particular lifting session, I start with seated calf raises. Now, the seated calf raise, because of muscle insertions and whatnot, it primarily targets the soleus muscle of the calf. The calf is comprised of the soleus and the gastrocnemius, so we're going to have to hit the gastroc later on. And I really love the seated calf raise, even though it's not perfect. It's only hitting one muscle of the two of the calf. But I still think that it's a great exercise to throw in there from time to time. So I'm hitting that, and then I'm supersetting this with standing calf raises. Now I'd like to do this just as kind of a drop set. This will ensure that you're hitting muscular failure with the calves. And with such a smaller muscle group like the calves, or sorry, they're not small, but they do recover very quickly. You can really take them to the extreme, to failure, and not really worry about their recovery potential. So I really love doing drop sets on calf training. So I'm doing this, and a common cue for these is really take it slow, feel the bottom of the movement, that stretch. You really want that stretch. You don't want to be bouncing. A lot of people bounce when they're doing their calf training. Take it slow, feel the muscular stretch, get that hypertrophy. Okay, next up, we actually have my favorite calf exercise builder for hypertrophy, aka the unilateral standing dumbbell resisted calf raise. I know that's a mouthful, but I really do love this exercise because you're focusing on one calf at a time, which is already hard enough. Granted, this is off of a step, which makes it even harder, but then you can really overload it by holding a dumbbell, and this is highly scalable. You can start with as little as 10 pounds, and then, I don't know who's doing 110, 120 where my gym maxes out, but you potentially could if you get strong enough, which is just incredible that this exercise is so loadable. And the beautiful part about this exercise is you're focusing on each side of your body individually, so it can save you from potential muscle imbalances, as well as the fact that it hits both muscles in the calf musculature, the gastroc and the soleus. Standing calf raises hit the whole entire thing. If you're lucky enough for your gym to have a standing calf raise machine, that would be a great alternative to this exercise. Unfortunately, my gym currently does not, and that is why I'm doing it in this way. You could also perform this bilaterally, otherwise known as using both legs at the same time. But I think the beauty in this exercise is that you can do one leg. So I would highly encourage that. Next, I get into some abduction, or the raising of the hip or the leg, and adduction, or bringing it inward machine. So the abductor and adductor machines are very beneficial in building those smaller muscles, your abductors and your adductors of your hips. And the reason why you should be building these is because a lot of people tend to cave their knees inward or outward when performing heavy compound lifts. And building these abductors and adductors are going to help you prevent the form breakdown that occurs, like the caving and bringing out of your knees while performing those compound lifts. So they're very beneficial for that aspect. They can also train a bit of the glute medius and other musculature of the lower body. And since we're not really hitting those directly in any other exercise in this program, I find that doing a quick 3 sets of each of these machines can be very beneficial. Now, just like calves and leg extensions and whatnot, you don't need to be performing these with extremely heavy weights. These exercises are more suited towards higher repetition per set instead of training for maximum strength. You're not trying to get extremely strong here. You're just trying to fatigue the musculature. And a common substitute for these exercises is doing a straight leg abduction or adduction movement with a cable, and the cable is attached to an ankle cuff, which is attached to your ankle. So that's another common way of performing this, unless your gym has a similar machine to what I'm performing here. Okay, so last but not least, I'm getting into some core training. And on my lower body days recently, I've liked to just do oblique training on the lower body days, whereas the upper body days are more so the transverse or the abdominals or just, the abs instead. So I'm starting this off with a suitcase carry, which is essentially just carrying a weight in one hand. Now you can do it how I'm doing it here, or you can do it right here with a kettlebell, which makes it more challenging. But the purpose of this exercise is to force your core or your obliques to withstand wanting to bend. By having to stabilize and facilitate force transfer through the core and keep a nice tall posture, it's going to have to work very functionally. This is going to build extremely functional abdominals and obliques over, doing just wood choppers, which I also condone. I think that doing wood choppers or Russian twists or any type of weighted twisting exercise is also a great way to dynamically hypertrophy your obliques and abs. But for this particular session, I opted for a functional movement like the suitcase carry. So I carry a heavy dumbbell in my hand, as seen here, for about 30 seconds. Then I swap to the other arm, carry it back. Do about 3 sets. That'll be fine. And then afterwards, I think it would be a great idea. I didn't do it in this workout, but I think it would be a great idea to add in some dynamic work like the Russian twist, like the wood choppers, even a machine oblique exercise would be a great alternative as well. Okay, so there you have it. That is just a sample exercise routine of my lower body hypertrophy workout. Now, like I mentioned in the beginning, these are very dynamic and subject to change. I kind of do it as I go, but I'm glad that I got to give you guys a glimpse into my thought process behind structuring these workouts. And keep in mind that the total amount of exercises, the total amount of sets and reps, that really changes with how your week is shaping up with your workouts, because you don't want to overdo it, you don't want to underdo it. And currently I'm doing 3 upper body days and 3 lower body days a week. And therefore, since I have 3 lower body days in a given week, I'm not doing a ton of work. I need to space it out over the course of those 3 days so that I'm not overdoing it. But I'm also making sure that I hit 6 sets per body part so that when everything is said and done, I'm hitting 18 sets per body part per week, which is a great number for myself and where I'm at on my fitness journey. So I hope that you guys took something out of it. I hope that I helped you with your own training. And I encourage you guys to think more methodically and approach your training with a more careful mind, a more educated mind, because, again, knowledge is power, and I think that it can take you a long way in your training. So good luck.